Hello, and welcome to the second in a series of Hitachi Vantara online conversations, during which we'll be exploring some of the topics which organizations should consider when modernizing their digital core and embracing new cloud technologies. Today's conversation will focus on taking an application-centric approach to change. By 2025, more than 85% of global organizations will be running containerized applications in production, which is a significant increase from fewer than 35% in 2019. Cloud is often viewed as the infrastructure of choice and the application modernization destination of choice. But the truth is, it can prove to be a complex reality. Whilst using multiple clouds and cloud-native applications ensures choice and flexibility, it can also provide operational challenges. How do you run traditional applications in a hybrid multi-cloud environment? How do you find the right balance between cost savings and investments? These are just some of the topics that our panel today will be discussing. On the panel are Melanie Posey, Research Vice President at 451 Research, Tom Christensen, Global Technology Advisor from Hitachi Vantara, and moderator John Bernstein. Remember, you can leave a question in the comments section at any time. You'll also find additional resources related to the conversations today for you to download. As Melanie said in one of her recent pieces of research, the modernization journey for legacy applications is not an optional trip, but it is one that may end up being more of a marathon than a sprint. So with that, Melanie, Tom, and John, over to you.
Richard, thank you very much for that. So as Richard says, we're going to be discussing with an application focus today, an application modernization focus. We're going to be talking about multi-cloud, hybrid cloud strategies. And as Richard said, delighted to be joined by Tom Christensen from Hitachi Vantara and from Melanie Posey from 451 Research. Tom, I'll start with you if that's okay. Companies are using a mix of public and private cloud depending on their workloads. What challenges does this approach present to these organizations?
Yeah, John, I think this is a really relevant question. And we have had many roundtables this year, around 200 different CIOs I've been hosting and talking to. And I would say, one of the things that they come back with when we talk about the key challenge with private cloud and public cloud is definitely around the cloud first strategy. And it's really important to get that one right the first time before you rush into cloud. And for that reason, take your cloud strategy and try to measure that one up against some of your colleagues in the industry who actually master that journey. That is really a key thing before you begin to utilize public cloud and private cloud. And then I would say that another topic that keep coming up, and this one is something that is on all the meetings, is about the culture and the skill sets that you need to have in the organization. You basically need to be prepared for that journey. So suddenly you're no longer administrating the infrastructure and you're no longer having engineers running the data center. You actually become a kind of a consumer where you are the one that, consume public services and private services. And you need to train your people so they have the right skill set when you start that journey into public cloud and private cloud. Another topic that comes up is the one about an exit strategy. This seems to be more important than we think about. So having the capability to actually get out and move into a different cloud solution is as important. And this one is really splitting up CIOs in, I would say, two groups. There are the ones that want to go deep in with AWS as an example and build their solution around all the offerings they can get. And then there are other CIOs that are more like, we want to use standard services and have the possibility to move to a different cloud vendor. And as one of them are saying, what public cloud vendors doesn't like is to have standard service because that's the race to the bottom. They basically want to get customers to use all the unique services they got. But people are a little bit nervous of Hotel California and get that login. So I would say, these are some of the top concerns that we are seeing our customers are dealing with.
Very good, Tom. And just so for the avoidance of doubt, when we talk about Hotel California, we mean you can check in, but you can never check out.
Yeah, that's exactly the one. And there are CIOs that have spent a lot of money building new solution on one vendor, and they're utilizing that platform with all these unique services. And suddenly they realize, getting out is not really possible. It's just like, the mainframe system. And then there are other users that take a more agnostic approach and say, we use standard service. We want to have a exit strategy, and we want to be able to use different cloud vendors. Yeah, but you're correct about the Hotel California. You can log in, but you can't check out.
Very good. Tom, for the moment, thanks very much. Melanie, I'd quite like to put that same question around challenges to you, companies using that mixture of private and public cloud. What are the challenges they face when pursuing this kind of hybrid strategy?
Well, one of the main things that we've seen in our research is the biggest challenge around hybrid and multi-cloud is management. How do you manage everything if you have some of your applications in a private cloud in your own data center, and you have other applications in one of the big hyperscale clouds? And I think the important thing to think about first before you even get into which cloud are you going to use for which thing is, what is the management framework you're going to have as sort of an overlay over top of everything? So that's one thing to think about. And I think a broader issue has to do with how our view of cloud is starting to change. One thing we like to say at 451 Research is that cloud is the infrastructure view. And then when you look at cloud native, that's where you get into the application view. So to Tom's point about Hotel California and being locked into a particular infrastructure framework, one way to look at it is, take the modernization approach first. Look at your application estate, decide which applications kind of worked in a pre-cloud environment. And again, to Tom's point about the mainframe, that's all well and good. But when you're dealing with the digital economy and with cloud as sort of the infrastructure engine of that distributed economy, you have to think a little bit more about exactly how you're going to develop these new applications, what new capabilities and functionalities are your customers demanding, does your supply chain and your business workflow require? And that's maybe a more comprehensive way of starting out your cloud journey based on what is it that you want to accomplish and what type of infrastructure environment works best for this particular application. If something is highly distributed, if it's customer facing or it's employee facing, a lot of times a public cloud environment makes the most sense because you have the agility and flexibility to do updates, to push workloads to different geographies. And when you start talking about private cloud, a lot of what we hear from our clients is that a lot of organizations are more comfortable having their data, their systems of records, the crown jewels of the enterprise, if you would, in a private environment that's kind of a central repository for all the other applications that leverage that data, which are more distributed in a public cloud environment. So, overall, I would say people need to keep in mind that cloud is the infrastructure view, and there are a lot of considerations on, what kind of environment you want. But the more important thing is the applications and how you're going to modernize them. And that's where cloud native comes into play.
Very good, Melanie. And we're going to get into the applications in more detail as we go along. Just another question for you, Melanie. Is the push to modernize applications putting pressure on IT to provide modern cloud native platforms, either on-premise or off-premise?
Oh, absolutely. To the point I previously made about, the cloud infrastructure view and the application cloud native view, there is a lot of pressure there for organizations. And a lot of times the CEO is facing a situation where in the lines of business are saying, we need to change our mindset or our culture, as Tom mentioned. We need to make it more of a DevSecOps kind of environment, going from the traditional the traditional waterfall approach to application development to a more dynamic view on how you put applications out there in the market. So the pressure becomes something where not everything necessarily IT related gets dictated by the IT department. So one of the cultural changes is, how do IT decisions get made in an organization that is digitally transforming its business model for a digital economy? What that means is that obviously the IT department executes on what the business needs to get business done. And sometimes the pressure is, how do you juggle all the different requirements? How do you put a policy framework in place to ensure that the right people and only the right people have access to the resources and are able to make moves, adds, and changes? And then there are compliance issues, so legal tends to get involved. And then there's also the broader issue of security. How do you make sure your applications and your infrastructure are secure enough to meet compliance and governance requirements, but agile enough to fulfill the requirements that the business needs to go forward?
Melanie, thank you. I'd like to get Tom's view in a second on the pressures on IT, but I'm just interested, Melanie, that's a long list. It's a long laundry list of things that IT needs to do and the way that IT needs to adapt. Should it simply accept its new role, or perhaps should it fight it?
I think IT needs to adapt, because once upon a time, IT was cost center, somewhere in the back of the organization, and all of the IT people lived in the data center and rarely ever saw the light of day. But now IT is more front and center as a part of how business gets done, how competitive differentiation gets established, how goods and services get delivered to customers, how employees get access to capabilities. So I think for IT folks, this is a really exciting time right now. I mean, of course, we've moved away from the IT command and control way of doing things, but IT being brought more into the business with IT decision makers, CIOs being at the table where the business strategy is being forged, and the CIO having the remit to go out and make it happen. That's an elevation of the role of IT in the organization. And in 451's research, we're increasingly seeing organizations look at IT as a strategic enabler of digital transformation and business success, rather than IT being a tactical cost center where the focus is simply keeping the lights on. I think it's an exciting time to be in IT right now, because you're actually in the room where it happens as far as business goes.
Very good. Thank you very much. Hotel California, and now a reference to Hamilton as well. We're doing very well with our musical references. Tom, give me a perspective on IT pressures.
Yeah, let me try to give you a perspective, because very often, and what we're talking about here is basically we have monolith applications. Should we modernize these applications? Should we start to use private cloud and public cloud? But we rarely ask the question, where does the pressure come from? And I think, Melanie, she is actually touching something which is extremely important here, because what is putting pressure on IT is basically line of business. And they would very often, and we have seen that over the last 4 years, they would like to do the digital transformation. They would like to sell their product or the service and add some extra service on top to become more competitive in the market, make money, save money, and stay more competitive based on that. And this is actually forcing pressure on CIOs because they have been seen as old legacy, only having these, monolith applications, not really being able to spin up service as fast as you can in public cloud. So when CIOs are meeting line of business, there are a completely new demand. And let me give you an example of one of these. We have this one from one of our sister companies, Hitachi Power Grid. And they are in a very, you could say, old business, distributing power to cities, to, countryside, regions, maybe an entire country. And they would like to stay more competitive. And how do you digitalize distribution of power? What they would like to do is to have an app so they can tell their customers, download this app. And when you turn on your washing machine, you can see whether you're using green energy or black energy. And this is a way where they can become more competitive and maybe win that deal because they are adding something extra on top. But when the line of business is knocking at the door to the CIO and say, we would like this one, the CIO say, well, I got this old legacy way of creating application. How do I actually get out to the transformer station? How do I get out to the box on the road and understand when people use power and how much they're using? I can't take a bare metal server and put out there. I can't take a virtual machine and put out there. There's no security around it. It's too heavy on the hardware running out there. So I need to actually shift to go into the edge core cloud architecture, which is a distributed application architecture. And this is where you begin to use containers, microservices, and other kinds of stuff that does not take so much overhead on the hardware, only 10% compared to a virtual machine. So you get portability. So suddenly, you can get something running at the road in a small box and understand the consumption of power. And at the same time, you can guide people with an app. And this is distributed app. So this is the one kind of pressure that is coming on IT. And the other one I just spoke about, being old legacy, it's one that comes up on many of these virtual roundtables. And this is where, IT try to say cloud first. And cloud first doesn't mean that it goes to public cloud. It can be private cloud as well. But it's turning the organization into, I consume it. I no longer manage it. I no longer operate it. So, you need to train people to take that step and basically be able to do it. But for many organizations, taking what you have had the last 25 years, that architecture, give consolidation, optimization, and also automation is actually a very tough task. So some CIOs are saying, I would like a private cloud because I get consolidation, I get optimization, and I get automation as well in that solution. And do you know what? We have done more than 1,200 data center assessment around the world. And we know that the utilization is not that high on the infrastructure you get. And automation is definitely not. So just by moving into a private cloud, well, you get all these benefits. And suddenly, total cost of ownership on an average level can be reduced by 33%. This is what we are seeing. And then, you take off the pressure. And if that solution offer a way that you can create distributed application and still keep your monolith application as well, well, you're suddenly in a position that you remove that pressure, and suddenly IT can embrace public and private cloud and can be more agile towards a line of business. And these are steps that we are beginning to see that the customers are looking at, and it brings a lot of value. Also for the financial aspect, you basically remove sunken capital in these solutions, and you can take that one and you can use it for growth or innovation or training or whatever you want in these private cloud. And I think this is why they are gaining traction in the market. And what I see is somewhat equal load between public and private. It depends on which country you look at, but definitely there is a good reason to keep some of your application in-house because it's security, it's lower cost, higher performance and stuff like that. And then there are other solutions we can talk on later today that get a lot of benefit from public cloud. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Melanie, I just want to quote, in fact, one of your own surveys, one of the 451 or 451 surveys, recent survey, you found that 1/3 of respondents reported that more than half of their current application estate needs to be modernized in some way to support evolving business requirements. Melanie, I wonder if that figure surprised you.
It actually surprised me to the extent that it was only 1/3 of respondents. So I think that speaks to the need for more, I guess, forensic examination of organizations' application estates. Because you do have a situation in some organizations where there's an application that, does one very specific thing, and everybody's afraid to touch that application because the guy who wrote that application in Fortran 40 years ago, has gone off to the great beyond at this point. So it's hard to actually get a sense of how many applications are in the estate to begin with and what they all do. So, I think that speaks again to the point we made earlier about, before you embark on a major journey into the cloud, that you actually take an inventory, take an assessment of not just your applications in terms of, the code and, how it works on this or that machine, but, what it actually does as part of the business process. And I think part of digital transformation is, of course, modernizing and updating the IT infrastructure. It's changing the way you develop and run applications, but it's also taking a look at your business process from the point of view of, what is the ultimate point of all of this IT? What value does it ultimately create, whether it's an internal operations value or an external value out to customers, partners, and suppliers? So I think we need a different way of looking at IT in a more holistic kind of way. And back to the point we made about IT being considered strategic or being tactical, like taking the strategic approach is something that helps you get a handle on which applications need to be modernized, which need to be just, thrown out and, you start all over again from scratch. And that's a conversation that needs to happen across the organization, not just the IT department. There's a line of business is involved in that. Of course, legal compliance is involved in that, as well as the CIO and the CIO.
Very good. So, Tom, 1/3 of respondents reporting that more than half of their current application estate needs modernizing. I think Melanie was suggesting that was a relatively conservative number, that perhaps in reality, it should be higher. Do you agree?
Yeah, we do see the same. And we also get that feedback from customers that they would like to modernize more application than 1/3 in the current estate. So, this one is already going on, this modernization. But I would also add to this one here that it is definitely not only customers that are going through that process right now, because, hypercloud, multi-cloud, as we're talking about, and as Melanie mentioned, managing that one between different vendors is extremely important, but it's basically also vendors. So vendors like Hitachi Vantara, we do have products that we have had for the last 15 years. Let me give you an example, like object storage. We came up with that in 2006. And we've put a lot of innovation into that one every 2 years and launched these innovation. But lately, we are beginning to take that platform and we are rewriting that platform into what we call a container world. Basically, because we want to add some more value to the solution that we bring to the market. And we fully understand that we can do a lot, but if we do that together with public cloud, we can bring more value to the end customer. So if I should give you an example, and this one is a really simple one, let's say that you would like to keep all your voice recording you have with your clients. It normally ends up somewhere in your object storage as a file with very few attributes. When was it created? When was the last access? And who have access to that file. But what we can do here is to take it and use a translate service from AWS and get it into clear text. And by using metadata we add to it, suddenly it becomes, we can index and we can do search, and we can give that service back to the end customer saying, if you have these files, well, we can basically help you to be able to search and find the conversation and the client who spoke to whatever internal person he was talking to. And this one is a clear example about, moving fast, at least moving faster than we did in the past by utilizing some of the service that you can find in public cloud. You don't need to do that translate service yourself if it already exists. And I think it's the same with customers when they look at some of these modernized applications, or let's say if they want to create new application in that container microservice world. Why would you create a chatbot if you can use one from Google? It might not make sense, but Google might be value adding to your solution. And I think, the whole thing here is when you change into that new private cloud, which I would call an app first infrastructure, where you of course have your virtual machines, but you also got containers. And now you also got microservices, which means you can take a monolith application, you can break it down in maybe 100 microservices, and you deliver exactly the same, but you create these microservices. They are kind of a Lego block that you can put together. And the key value here is that you can basically reuse these microservices to the next app and the next app you're doing. And the feedback I get from all these roundtables is, for those customers who do that and create that capability, breaking down silos between application developers, operational people, and security people, bake it into one team and begin to deliver that much faster delivery of application. We can meet the requirement from line of business, and we are no longer seen as old legacy, and we are actually taking ownership of that. So, as one said, the time it takes to create a monolith application, I can create 20 modern apps in that time and be relevant to line of business. So, I think, as we go down the line, and at least over the next 3-4 years, I think, and this is what I can see and why we do all these roundtables, is that there is a clear movement in that direction. And you want to have that and own that capability in-house. And as one customer said, we don't no longer consider ourselves as a cargo company. We consider ourselves as a software company going forward. And it's a very strong message when you start considering yourself as something that can bring value to line of business and to the rest of the organization with a more agile service.
Thanks. I was going to ask you actually about the benefits of container and microservices, but I think you've rather summed it up well. So I will move on. Melanie, let's talk instead. Let's get to the specifics of which applications you should modernize. So which, in your opinion, should you modernize and which should you simply build net new in and for the cloud?
I think when you get into the whole question of what to modernize and, what to just start all over again with, think about like where value gets created in your organization. So anything that is a customer facing application is something that should be considered a candidate for net new treatment. And the reason for that is, again, we keep coming back to this issue, but it's a fact of the digital economy is that value is distributed, therefore applications need to be distributed as well. So, anything that's customer facing, think of things like, e-commerce, support, personalization, a lot of these customer experience kinds of things need to be rewritten net new, not just because they need to take advantage of the agility and scalability of the cloud, but also because a lot of these customer-facing applications, they're starting to be very much at the edge. Think of things like, sort of examining customer footfall and, of sale types of applications. That happens in the retail establishment, or, think about autonomous vehicles. The software that guides those autonomous vehicles needs to be at the edge because that's where the consumer is. That's where the car is. So I think that's one way to look at, what needs to be in the cloud versus in a more traditional environment, and therefore which applications need to be rewritten first. And in fact, 451 Research's surveys show that the applications that are first in line to get the cloud native, net new cloud first treatment are indeed customer facing applications, applications related to data and analytics, because, obviously that's kind of a new area that organizations are looking at. And value is created in the digital economy in a very data-driven kind of way. You use data to get insights to improve the products, improve the customer experience. Therefore, you need a new application and a more scalable infrastructure to make that happen. And then another area we've seen for cloud-native treatment is what we call specialized business functions. Kind of the secret sauce of an organization's product or service that makes it easy to use, that makes it seamless. Kind of thinking of a lot of the applications that are available with Apple products, for instance, how you can sync all your music across your different devices. That kind of thing is a very specialized process that adds differentiation, adds value. So for an organization that has something like that makes life easier for customers to consume your products, that makes that customer more sticky to you and your brand, that's definitely something you should look to modernize that application, because you create differentiation. And if you do it in a cloud native way, you're able to iterate on that application a lot faster than you would be with a traditional monolithic application.
Melanie, thank you very much. Tom, the same question to you, building on what Melanie has said. Where do you stand on which applications to modernize?
Yeah, I think we are very much in line with Melanie here and 451 and their view on what should actually be modernized and which applications should you maybe not do. So let me give you another customer example. I remember a CIO just starting in a new role, and the previous CIO, he created a cloud-first strategy where he wants to move everything into cloud. And when he took over and began to look at this one, he clearly saw that, there are applications which simply doesn't make sense. So what he did was to create a decision tree saying that if the benefit is above 60%, and if we can explain why we're doing this and what is the objective, we would actually spend the time and the money to take that application and put it into cloud, or maybe to rewrite it into a distributed architecture, which is, what is the modern application architecture. So, and going through that decision tree, he was actually moving things in really quickly. And then he took a lot of the other legacy things and put it into a parking lot. And then he looked at it and said, maybe we could create a private cloud and say first cloud, having a first cloud strategy could be private and public, and then start looking at how could he put it into that, private cloud. And I think, in there, he could take legacy application, which are not ready to be rewritten for cloud and run it in that private cloud. We have to remember that monolith application is one structure, which is tailor-made for, the infrastructure and everything. And when we talk about hybrid cloud, we often talk about a distributed architecture, and it's two different things. And there are applications which you can't just move into that distributed world. And then definitely, when you take this step and you move into that digital transformation where you have edge core cloud and you want to understand how customers are consuming your product and you want to come up with recommendation and guidance through an app. Well, this is clearly a distributed one. And this is where DevSecOps suddenly becomes really important, because you need to bring developers and operational teams together, but you also need to have security as part of this. You no longer have a data center you can put security around. You basically have to take it from end to end. And this one is changing a lot when it comes to security. And this is why, when you move into that first infrastructure with container and microservice and all that apps that you create, that you really have security with you, because this is as key as modernizing applications. But yes, there are applications which you quickly can move into that distributed world and start put into public cloud. And some customers, they actually claim that, some of their front-end applications are easy to move. And this is what they are doing. But I think it really depends on what kind of application landscape you have. And you basically need to ask the question, why are we doing this? What is the objective? And then you just have to work from there.
And Tom, in the spirit of asking those big questions about why we're doing this, what about mission critical legacy applications? Is it a case of lifting and shifting or doing something slightly different?
Yeah, let me try to explain that one a little bit, because we have seen some strange behaviors over maybe the last 2 years or 3 years. We've seen some customers have been really rushing into cloud, lift and shift. And we always ask the question, what is the value of doing lift and shift? And when we analyze cloud, we can see that around 24 to 25% is pure data. And about 25% is virtual machines, which indicates that some workloads are just lift and shift into that cloud. And treating cloud like another data center is maybe not the right thing to do. It's more costly, and it doesn't really give you a lot of benefit. But rewritten an application and use that in cloud makes a lot of sense. But we have seen that in some cases and in some countries, around 50% of all these workloads are bouncing back on the data center. And when they come back, they do not end up in the old legacy infrastructure. They end up in that private cloud. Around 14% are reallocated into cloud, but 36% will stay in that private cloud. And we see that some of the mission critical is ending up here. And then, you take an extra look and you ask the question, should we rewrite that one if it makes sense? But we definitely begin to see repatriation of some workloads. The key thing here, and the feedback I always get, is, does that mean public cloud is decreasing? And not at all. Public cloud is growing with 30%, but non-cloud is more like stable. So the total market is growing, but there are some dynamics in it where workloads rush out and they repatriate from it, end up in cloud, and people start rethinking, what should I do with it? Should I keep it, in-house? And critical application often require a lot of security around it because it is critical for business. Cost it needs to be low, and then high performance. And you get the best performance when your infrastructure is very close to your application. So for that reason, a lot of customers are keeping these mission critical application in-house. Around the cost, I could give you an example. I have used it a couple of times where we came across a tele provider that is asked to log, all phone calls. And they are very small files, where are you located when you make the phone call? Who did you actually talk to? And how long was that conversation? And a tele provider needs to keep that. And one tele provider said, we want to move all that data into cloud because it's part of our first cloud strategy. And when they moved it in, they suddenly realized that when the police are coming and ask for access to data, they need to do index and search. Touching all that data comes with a price. And guess what? Suddenly the price goes up. And the tele provider was asking, can we take data back? And we said, that's going to take 3 months before that is done. Maybe we could find a workaround and do an index. And then you search in the index and you pick the file you need. But guess what? I don't think that was the idea when they moved data into that cloud. So, you have to be careful about what you're doing. You have to think about it and have a clear strategy, and then do what is right for you. And then, keep what else you need in your private cloud.
Tom, thank you very much. I've got one more question after this one, but Melanie, just briefly, a view on what you do with those mission critical legacy applications?
In our research, we've seen a range of different approaches to mission critical legacy applications. Actually, the main thrust of the modernization process for close to 40% of organizations is to do this thing that we call modernization in place, which means you take a unified view of modernizing the infrastructure and modernizing the application architecture as well. And, to Tom's point, that's a way that you can keep the crown jewels of your organization in an in-house environment, but modernize them in a way that you can be flexible enough to move them to the public cloud at some point if that makes sense. Then another way that people go about things, it's maybe closer to 30% of organizations, is to refactor and shift. So what that means is you refactor, you modernize the application in an on-premises in-house environment, and then you shift that application to the public cloud. And that actually makes a lot of sense to do it that way, because you basically want to get the application right in terms of what you want it to do and how you want it to perform before moving it to a public cloud environment. And one thing we're seeing that is not quite as prevalent now as was maybe 4 or 5 years ago was this lift and shift approach. And one reason for that, we think, is that a lot of the low-hanging fruit has already been picked in terms of what types of workloads and applications can you just pick up from the on-premises data center and move to the cloud and not really have to do much refactoring, not have to do much thinking about it. And we see that we're maybe coming towards the end of that being the predominant approach to mission critical legacy app modernization, is simply because organizations are saying that you need to modernize the application in order to actually get the most benefit for it in your transformation. And one other thing I wanted to point out is, to Tom's point about repatriation, kind of going back to the Hamilton reference again, a lot of times with these applications, you'll be back. It wasn't ready to move to the cloud originally, so it goes back to an on-premises environment. But I think the wrong way to think about it is that a win for private cloud is a loss for public cloud, because we at IDC in our surveys, we found that something like almost 2/3 of organizations look at hybrid as the organizing principle of their IT going forward. So things will definitely move around.
Melanie, thanks very much. Tom, I know you want to come in, so I'm going to ask you to come in very briefly because we are getting towards the end of our time together, and I have got one more question. So a quick answer, please, Tom.
Yeah, just a quick one that I would like to add that I have seen talking to many CIOs is that it really depends on the size of the company. So you got small, you got mid-size, and you got enterprise and global companies. And, the bigger the company become and the older the company is, the more legacy they have. And legacy in that environment really have dependencies between many different applications. There is an ecosystem of application which really complicate that journey. But when you go down to smaller business, it's more easy to move into public cloud solution.
Tom, thanks very much. As I say, one final question, and I'm going to ask you to restrict your answer to just a couple of sentences, if you wouldn't mind, which is not easy, but it will finish us off quite nicely. What assessments are organizations making when evaluating the best app modernization approach to take? Melanie first, please.
I think, as I discussed before, there's kind of a hierarchy, or not exactly a hierarchy, but more of a broad landscape of options you can take. And I think organizations are looking at things on a workload by workload basis. As we've discussed throughout this session, there's a different decision tree you'll make based on, Is the application monolithic? Is the application customer facing? Is it a data intensive application? Is it an edge application? So I think these assessments have to be made on a holistic basis. And there's no kind of real rules in place for this type of application works in public, but this one works best in private. I think the way to look at it is, you think about the benefits of public cloud, which are agility, flexibility, scalability. Think about those attributes of public cloud and use that as a way to figure out, is this application suited to a public cloud environment? Can it actually take advantage of all of the capabilities of a public cloud environment? If the answer is no, then maybe you keep it on premises. But you might actually even move that to the public cloud as well if you're an organization that basically wants to get out of the business of managing its own infrastructure.
Melanie, thank you very much indeed. A brief word, Tom, on assessments.
Yeah, I should try to do it very short. So what we do in Hitachi Vantara is we offer a consulting service where we go in and we take a snapshot of the entire application landscape. And based on our experience, we will group application in different groups. And one is definitely low-hanging fruits, saying, this will take you 2 months, 3 months. And these are very easy to move. And then we will recommend the customer what to do. And then there will be another group where we say, this one needs to be rewritten and modernized. It takes a longer time to do. And then, there will be other groups where you say, this one here is not really suitable for public cloud at all. It is a monolith and it needs to run in that environment for many good reasons. And then we have a really good discussion with customers about it. And it becomes more easy to make a decision. And I would recommend customers to reach out to companies that can help them, like Hitachi Vantara, with that assessment, because that will give them a good, solid foundation for what is the next step moving forwards to private cloud and public cloud in that hybrid setup.
Tom, thank you very much. Melanie, thank you as well. And thank you all very much for watching.